I think political science is not that rigid to deal with like other science like physics or math. That's why the lecture is gonna be more like discussions or brainstorming built upon certain theoretical base. And our lectures together will be only a pace, and we might have case studies extra and other material to use like to discuss and make the classes more virtual and interesting and interactive actually. Allow me just like to give you a glimpse about the entire track and how things is going to build. We're going to differentiate between various levels in this course. We're going to talk about theoretical, implementary, and examples of democracy and human rights. We're going to have three chapters. Our first chapter will be uh, dealing with the core theoretical aspects. We're going to discuss what is democracy as a definition. We're going to discuss the characteristics, forms, basic access. We're going to discuss certain norms of democratic elections. We're going to talk about the law, the constitutionalism. We're going to discuss certain aspects between democracy and media. We're going also to discuss political parties, interest groups, NGOs, etc. We're going to discuss the impact of social media and social components with democracy. We're going to maybe divide all these points into classes. So our class today will only focus on number one, what is democracy? Okay, let's talk about what is democracy. What is democracy as a landscape of conceptual idea? Let's talk about where did this idea started from? Where do we have the basics for this concept before talking about the definition itself? Democracy might be a very familiar word to all of us. All of us, at certain points, hear the word, and maybe the media, newspaper, television, we might even use that. But the nice and the interesting point is we might use it in a very various meaning contexts, which means none of us might use it in the same sense or in the same features. In other words, the conceptual aspect of this word might vary from very wide range of ideas. This means still we don't have a total agreement about this idea. The concept itself is still very misunderstood and in a way misused. Why? Because every one of us may be raised in a very different social cultural context, which created their ideas or their perspective about democracy. It is not about us, it's about everyone on this earth, which means people who may raised in a state where there is no discrimination between male and female will see democracy and political participation in a way totally different from people who see male are superior to female, for example. In other words, people who raised in a community differentiate between black people and white people will see democracy also in a different way. Um, uh, the point that I want you to understand that is democracy is not something new. It is not something we just met in the last 2 centuries. Actually, the beginning of this term is backward to the Greek centuries. Started with the beginning of the humankind ever. We are tracking the idea of democracy even backward to the social contract theories like Hope, Rousseau, other thinkers who started to talk about the relationship between governments and people. And in a very simple way, they think that democracy is the power of people. Day by day, year by year, the idea itself and the context itself changed because the stages changed as well. The political system as well changed. One of the most interesting questions that we're going to find solutions and answers through our course is who's bigger and who's first, political science or democracy? And I think this is a very controversial question. I want to share the answer with you by the end of the course. Meanwhile, let's say or let's agree that we might have a lot of definitions, a lot of authors who try to give explanation for the idea of democracy. Some of them called it the state of law. Some of them just explain it as the separation between power or the power of the majority or limitation of controlling. Others called it or link it to the idea of citizenship. Others even linked it to the ability of minority to be exhausted, the freedom of opinions, etc., etc. But the only agreed point among all these explanations is that democracy is an agreed term. If we didn't agree upon certain definition, let's at least talk about certain characteristics that we might have in common with all the definitions that we discussed. Let's talk about certain characteristics that we might see in all patterns of democracy. Number one, democracy is more than just a set of specific government institutions. It rests upon a well understood group of values, attitudes maybe, all of which may take different forms and expressions among cultures and cities around the world. Number two, democracies rely upon fundamental principles, not uniform practices. Democracy is a government in which power and civic responsibility as exercised by adult or by all adult citizens directly or maybe through their freely elected representatives. The four characteristics might be that democracy rests upon the principles of majority rule and individuals' rights. I want you to pay attention for this characteristic because it spotlight the importance of the voice of minorities. The fifth characteristics might be that democracies guard against all powerful central governments and decentralize government to regional and local levels, understanding that all levels of government must be accessible and, in a way, access to all people as possible. This is, in a way, giving the idea of transparency and the more authority towards people, even in the large communities and cities. Number six would be that democracies understand that one of their prime functions is to protect such basic human rights as freedom of speech, religion, the right to equal protection under law, the opportunities to organize and practice and participate fully in the political, economic, cultural life, to build an independent characteristics, to be individual citizen. You might have your own ideas and assemblies, etc., etc. The seventh characteristic will be that democracies conduct regular, free, and fair elections open to all citizens to vote and to participate in the political life. These are part of the characteristics that we might have whenever we deal with the core idea of democracy. Okay, as we said, like democracy, keep talking about modern democracy, we might talk about a certain element called decision-making process. In modern democracy, decision-making processes are made by the majority and minorities submission in implementing certain operation and implementation. Society's democratic control of security ministries is implemented according to the intended purpose and interest within the law, which means the law is the higher level for everyone in the community. Number six might be that domination of persuasive, or let's call it the we might call it actually the sound of mind. It's like you need to convince other to follow you. It is not to use power. It is not anymore to use power to force other. It is all about stop using violence, stop forcing, stop suppression others, stop using power to force other to do whatever you want. It is all about using mind and convincing others, and maybe convincing citizens to follow the law, or maybe to agree on certain concepts or practices in the community. Number seven will be the real implementation of principles of constitutional state, including separation of power principle. And this is exactly support the previous point, is that no one can use power to force any law or any norm or any idea over others. Number eight, depending on the form of implementation of people's sovereignty, the democracy can subdivided into direct, representative, indirect, into actually several patterns depending on the shape and the structure of the political system itself. Number nine will be that the modern democracy is defined as um, a form or a structure where everyone can exist, where there is a community that can have a huge diverse of people, ideas, and concepts. It's based on diversity of public interests like economic, social, cultural, religious, ethnic group, regional, etc., etc., forming their expressions and practice their ideas and perspective, and building maybe their own parties and gathering, movement, assemblies. This idea of pluralistic feature of modern democracy is connected with the fact that people is the supreme power, as the core power that shapes the structure itself, represents itself as an idea of accepting everyone and allowing everyone to participate. Uh, and in a way or another, this is a little bit very idealistic, but actually, that's how they wanted modern democracy to look like, at least. A new feature actually here might be that the politics or the political domain is taken in this modern track as a field of intergroup cooperation, of competition, struggle, and compromises, while democracy is seen as a form of governing that allows various social groups to express freely their interests and find out compromises and solutions for everything. The important point here is that all the discussion is about how all these various groups or perspective might coexist together. This challenge or the struggle exactly is the spirit of democracy or of modern democracy, how new thinkers wanted to look like. One important point that I want you to keep in mind whenever we talk about democracy, that all thinkers, all scholars, philosophers that talked about democracy linked in as the supreme power, were the hand of people who exercise this power either directly or indirectly through the elected representatives who are responsible to the people are the supreme. They are all talking about the power of people, the power of majority, or the in a way or another separation between power and the separation between government and nation. Let's talk in a way about the various aspects of democracy. We here might talk about democratic state, democratic government, democratic society, democratic economic order or structure, democratic way of life. Modern democracy actually nowadays differentiate between these patterns of democracy. They actually differentiate between how people talk about the democratic state and the idea of democratic government. They also differentiate between the democratic community or democratic society and the democratic economic order. They even differentiate between the democratic pattern of life and the democratic community. We're going to discuss the differentiation and the features of all these aspects lecture by lecture and day by day once we go ahead and discussing democracy. Let's in a way agree that we might have certain set of characteristics that determine the general shape of democracy. It starts with number one, the sovereignty of people, the sovereignty of the power, the voice of people. That people are the source of power, the source of constitution later, the source of the structure of the system in general. Number two, state and government are considered as means of facilitating the life of people. It's not a way to control people. They are a way to make any citizen's life easier. Number three, faith and rationality of man. What does this mean? In modern democracy, they do believe that people are rational, they are very trustable. You can give the space to any person to express their ideas and their thoughts. Number four, they say that one of the core characteristics of modern democracy is liberty. Again, because they do believe that people is the most important element in the community, so it is definite that liberty would be the title of the modern democracy. As liberty is the title, equality will be the indicator for this community. They also talk about the core fundamental human rights inside these communities. They were also talking about the independent and impartial justice state. Um, a lot of people are mixing between the idea of equality and justice, but it is very important to differentiate between the two terms. And in modern democracy, it is very important to say that everyone is equal in front of the law and under the law, while there must be justice to give everyone the opportunity that suits him or her. The last point is the role of the majority and the voice of the minority. This is actually one of the most important characteristics of the modern democracy, because it is no more about someone who's controlling the community or certain group controlling the community. It is more and more about how they deal with the structure of the community, how they establish communities, and even if the majority is controlling the country, this must never mean that to take control over the minorities or other ethnic groups maybe, or other groups that who are different from the majority, either politically or in the cultural context or regional context. Actually, the role of majority was the most controversial aspect of modern democracy, because they were talking about the idea of representative democracy and how this might be a little bit scary, because when you give your vote for someone, so it is definite that he would represent you in certain point without even going back to you in certain discussions. But in general, the sovereignty of people, state versus government, state and government considered as means, not the core of the structure of the community. Liberty, equality, freedom, the fundamental set of human rights, are the core features of modern democracy nowadays. Another set of these features could be the respect of public opinion, that everyone has an equal right to express themselves. The faith of peaceful and constitutional methods is one of the most important aspects of modern democracy. Freedom to form oppositions parties. This is a little bit controversial, because certain constitutions actually um, don't give the right to form parties or to form opposition parties under certain governments. So, and even the identity of these parties must be upon the law and upon the constitution. So it is a little bit ambiguous how to establish these parties and who will determine the identity of these parties, and etc. etc. But in general, they do agree that the existence of such parties is very important and very essential to establish a democratic community. A new feature is to open competition for all political powers, parties, to compete in a very respectful way to win the election and to represent people. Uh, and one of the most important conditions is a periodic elections, that it is not forever, it's for a very accurate um, period of time, and then this job will be over. Another feature is independent means of propaganda. They were talking about separation between media and authority, and this is one of the most important points. A new feature is the role of law, and as we agreed before, the separation between powers is one of the most important elements. A decentralization of power, communities that are diverse, that contain everyone, and diversity as the main identity of democratic communities. Okay, I think we reached to the point where we end this lecture. We were trying to make these lectures short and easy to understand and record. I just want to attract your attention for a very important point, that these lectures will be a reference for all whatever we're doing together. But also I want you to make sure to read the material that I'm gonna to upload on the Moodle. Thank you very much. Please be safe and see you in the next lecture. Nighty.